Or sit.
No, I just wanted to welcome everybody and also really acknowledge why it's today, why we're here. Pat died 10 years ago today,
Wow.
and as he was writing all the time, this seemed like a nice way to honor that anniversary. And he did not publish his stories, and he didn't finish a lot of his stories, but he wrote a lot of stories, and he read a lot of his stories. And Rob and his brother Mike have been kind enough to do this for us, and you know, I mean, I hope I can not like Mike really just saw these stories yesterday, and has been learning a lot about what Pat was up to up here in Vermont. But you know, I just want to let people know that these are all works in progress that we have taken in the moment in time that they were left. And so I appreciate your doing that. And
There's written corrections right on the page.
Oh yeah, these are all drafts. Everything is drafts. I spent a lot of time trying to find around the house the drafts and put them together. Right. And so just keep that in mind as you are listening. Okay. And the next one is based in Vermont, which is really different, and part of why I was hoping that Rob would read it, but it's longer, so we'll see. We may do part of it, more of it. We'll just see where you
See
are.
how it goes.
Thank you.
Boris on the Farm version 2. Boris's brother Jerry started out small, repairing oil burners. Then Jerry's oil burner service, his very own business, and now Jerry's Enterprises Incorporated. He sold, repaired, and maintained oil burners, and in Queens, this was big business. So Jerry had $1 million in the bank, in a savings account, earning only 2.30 APR. He liked it. Being able to walk into the neighborhood bank with a briefcase and say, "Fill that up with $1 million." Jerry had a portfolio too, but the $1 million in cash was his abiding pleasure. Jerry found a girl he liked. She lived down the block and also liked living in Broad Channel. Her father repaired oil burners. He worked from his home, a 1.5-story house with a postage stamp yard that was sided with green asphalt shingles. Jerry married her. Boris fell in love with a girl who lived on Claremont Avenue in Manhattan. Her father had tenure at Columbia, and she went to an elite private school. Boris went to live in the country alone and planted carrots on someone else's land without permission, an idle field, and watched the weeds grow and harvested a bent bushel. He carved small wooden boats and built birdhouses and house sat for people who went to Europe for a year. He visited Jerry on holidays, and in the summer, in Broad Channel, went out in Jerry's boat with the neighborhood guys. They drank beer until they were all having pissing contests from the side of the boat as other boaters sped by shouting obscenities. If he and Jerry had ever gone to a family therapist, she might have located in their past the exact moment their paths diverged. One morning, just before they became teenagers, in their cramped apartment in Broad Channel, Queens, Boris told Jerry he wasn't really his brother, that in fact he came from another planet. Boris entered into a trance, staring at Jerry with unseeing eyes, as Jerry kept saying, "Hey, cut that out, man." Boris repeated in a monotone, "I am from another planet. I am not your brother," and found he could not stop. The undulating hills of Boris's pastoral desires were first tilled right there in an industrial corner of New York City by his father, who remembered sheep grazing under the Queensboro Bridge. Fields of sunflowers, farms, and barges pulled by horses in the creek that separated Brooklyn from Queens, and tilled by Grandma Jana, who was born, raised, and lived with her 9 sisters on the family farm outside Budapest until when she was 25. And then quick, everybody on the boat, empires collapsed, armies marched, and there were no husbands to be found outside Budapest. Jana, her sisters, cousins, and uncles came to Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Now adrift, his income falling, rents rising, Boris came to the Green Mountains. Here, Boris sometimes had the use of a car and sometimes not. At present, he did not, but the house he was sitting in had a fine view to the east and south, with only a few houses visible when the leaves had fallen from the trees, and no neighbors closer than half a mile. His bicycle worked, and he was familiar to enough people in the area, so if he walked eventually someone would offer him a ride. The land sloped down away from his house for a mile or so until it began to rise. The hill opposite his house was about 100 acres of sugar maple. Early one March morning, Boris walked over to the sugar house and saw George, a companion carrot planter, who pointed at Boris and said, "Just the man we're looking for." That very morning, Boris began lugging and pouring sap and would continue for many weeks. It was prodigious sugaring season, extending well into April. Boris worked 10 hours a day collecting sap that would filling one 50-gallon drum after another with maple syrup. When the sap turned orange and the trees about to bud, George collected his check and left for Norway to move stones. Boris was left to clean up. There had been about 20,000 taps that season, and what ran from those taps ended up mostly in buckets. When that was done, old James asked Boris to work on the farm, which was 25 miles to the north. Communication between Boris and old James was minimalist in the extreme, and in fact, Boris didn't know until this day, 2 weeks after the second James had come to help with the cleanup at the sugar bush, that the second James was indeed young James, the son, to whom Boris would be reporting if he chose to work on the farm. Boris wished he detected an expression of amusement on young James' face when old James revealed the family connection, because Boris had been treating young James as his surrogate, young James having arrived a month after Boris, and also was not inclined to speak, the absence of verbal communication apparently a family trait. "Should I come tomorrow?" asked Boris to young James now, but old James answered, "Come Monday at 9. Without any discussion of wages, hours, chores, travel directions were given. It apparently was a done deal, though Boris's heart sank a bit when he learned the farm was 25 miles to the north, not bicycle range. Now, if at the sugar bush there had been the usual workplace banter, arguments about how to do things and talk of the weather, Boris probably would have said no. But the predominance of silence, the seeming rule of silence, created a kind of vacuum that sucked Boris in. That evening, he called Jerry in Broad Channel. "I'm not flipping burgers, Jerry. I'm singing the song of the earth. I am. It's a job with an historical view I have. You flipping cow patties, and you don't have anything." "Fine, but I need a car," said Boris. "Think about it," said Jerry. "You like the view. No, you love the view. It moves you. The view means something to you, the whole package. Buy it, but you can't buy it. Why? Because you don't have any money. Think about it. You don't have any money. You don't have a car. You have somebody else's view. Think about it. I have the money. I could buy it. Do you know why? I think about it. Because I am not from another planet. I have the money. Look, Jerry, I'm the only one. Hey, your brother, who you can talk to like this, right? So I need a car. I'm not buying you a car. Forget about it. You can use the old Dodge in the garage. It's a good car. 140,000 miles. Okay, Boris said. You want to come up here for a visit? Take a break? Bring, what's her name? Your wife, Amy? What, you expect me to drive the car up there? Yeah, you can fly back or take the bus. Take the bus. Take the bus. Tuberculosis. Rent a car? Asked Boris. Okay, I'll rent you a car. You pick it up. You drive it down here. You get the Chevy. You're all set. Wait, don't hang up. What rental place? For you, a Econo car. Subcompact. Pick it up at the airport. Boris, think about it. What are you going to do all day? Moo moo with the cows? Think about it. You know what I'm saying, right? Hey, diddly dee, this is the life for me attitude isn't going to get you anywhere. And do you know why? Because it hasn't gotten you anywhere. Think about it. Jerry asked Boris when he came down to get the car. Boris, why are they letting you work on the farm? Are you working for nothing? I mean, people pay to work on real family farms these days. You're not working for nothing, are you? The first thing Boris noticed when he walked into the barn was that he was alone. And the second was the immensity unapparent from the outside, like walking into a church where people will hush their voices and stand still and feel the place, which is what Boris did. He stood in the corner of the barn, in the main corner, let his eyes slowly follow the hand-carved pillars up, 60 feet maybe, to the rafters where birds flew about, and felt the place. Some family business, he thought. In a couple of weeks, he'd start redesigning this place in his mind, thinking of where apartments could go. But right now, he realized why people get so excited about these huge old wooden barns and tear them down and rebuild them in Connecticut. The hand-carved hewn wood absorbed sound, and Boris thought it natural that nothing much is said in this barn between people. Communication has become the quiet responses of the body to the observation of the others. Boris feels like he and young James are deaf and mute. Boris was not bothered by this, though he was an adaptable guy, and his other senses became more fine-tuned. Boris is naturally shy, but his silence had nothing to do with his shyness. It has to do with the inadequacy of works to expand upon sameness. Sidebar. The sameness had beat down upon people with a hammer until they were speechless. Because the road of action, the wave of a hand, the nod of a head, had become the preferred way of saying things. This is all that was needed. Said all that was needed to be said. There was always work to do that didn't require speech, which suited Boris too, unless what Boris had to say was specific to the task at hand. Out of kindness to himself, Boris probably would have chosen to eat his alone. But that was decided for him. Not too much happens in the barn between Boris and young James either. This is not much that an outsider observer could actually say happened. Boris suspected things happened, but Boris couldn't be sure. They observe each other. They move by each other. It is the hands that do the work. The hands that are the focal point of energy. The immense hay bins in the barn, empty when Boris had arrived, began to fill up. For weeks, it had just been Boris and young James, and old James driving the 3 tractors, cutting the hay, raking and tethering and baling, And then, as the summer solstice approached and the moon waxed full, others started to show up in the fields with a variety of vehicles and a variety of people, women, children, men, all of them loading hay. They were never introduced. They didn't stand around chatting. They arrived, worked, and left. The Olds hadn't had a hay crop like this in recent memory, and Boris must have stacked at least 10,000 bales of first cut hay that had never been wet. The night of the full moon in June had worked until midnight. I'm sorry. Go back and read that again. The night of the full moon in June, they worked until midnight. Soon, they would start filling up a second barn down the road. That barn, just an empty sentinel over the fields that lay fallow. After Boris drove in the last trailer of bales that night, old James offered him a glass of whiskey and let him drive the old Jeep home. But nobody was singing the song of the earth, thought Boris. Time's up. Test's over. Hand in your papers. Good try. When Jenny arrived to do the milking, Boris watches her hands, differently now because of young James' lewd comment, or was it lewd? He'd only said, "Jenny has some hands." He watched her prep the cow's teats for milking, watched the way he watched everything, secretly, out of the corner of his eye, glancing, walking by. Boris didn't want to stare. James probably didn't mean, imagine those hands on your pecker, buddy. But that young James could say anything like that anyway. Not that young James could say anything like that anyway. The one thing young James could say is what he said. Because young James only said what fit in one exhale. So it was usually just one sentence. In fact, if Boris thought about it, it was always just one sentence. For this, Boris was grateful. But could young James consider what a man's desires were? So Boris decided that young James meant referring to Jenny's hand was what he said one evening after Jenny arrived. "I wouldn't trust my cows to anyone else." And over the weeks, one exhale at a time, Boris learned that Jenny lived with her mother, that Jenny once owned her farm, and it was larger than the Olds, and had been in her family for almost as long. Young James, maybe protecting an asset, and maybe an insider from an interloper, had told Boris, "Don't ask her about it." Young James had pretty much taken control of the herd, but old James still made most of the decisions about the fields, of the plantings and harvestings. It had just been Boris and young James doing the barn chores. So Boris was elated when Jenny had begun working once a week to do the milking. Though Jenny never said a word to him, but good morning or good evening. And Boris never said anything to her except good morning or good evening. The hushed air of the barn had an added electric quality, an air of expectancy and tension. He expected something, but he had no idea what it was. But it was probably only that at some point they might have a conversation. But that wasn't necessarily true. What Boris expected was what he wanted. He wanted to talk. He wanted to go over to Jenny and say, "How are things going?" Boris asked questions, but he was careful not to show his ignorance of some things. Certainly he had no idea how things were run here, and he felt there was a very clear line about what would be considered intrusive, so he kept his mouth shut. But that changed little by little over the months, and the way all things seemed to change here, if they changed at all, little by little. So young James and Boris began talking. "We used to plant more straw than just this one field," said young James. Boris felt he was being invited to share in the sacred ancestral way, but it would take years of doing. Boris had practically indentured himself to. Boris doubted he would be here that long. We don't need the straws as much, and there's less land, young James had said. So after spring and midsummer had passed, Boris learned that fields next to young James were for sale, that farm having failed, but young James could not afford to buy them. In fact, most of the fields north and south in the immediate vicinity would be for sale. If they were being used, it was by farmers like the Olds, under a short-term lease. No farmer could afford them, but it used to be the opposite. That's how you got bigger. That's how you thrived. The land was affordable for farming, and it stayed in farming. No one else wanted to buy it. He rented the fields now, but he didn't know how long that would last. When he grew, when he grew less, he'd have to buy more. So young James had taken over the herd and was breeding it to get the most milk from the herd that their land could support. Young James kept track of each gallon of milk and how much each cow produced at every milking. James had 160 teats to keep track. Boris watched. Boris worked so much on the farm, that some things started to make sense. Now old James' body language was more quickly understood. Old James is the ultimate arbiter of things, the one who was one step closer to the grandfather Olds who had originally brought this land under the plow. When Boris had forgotten to put the plug in the bulk tank one evening milking, and some of the milk went down the drain, he had, as usual, been milking with young James, but it was old James who came in the barn the next morning and said, without looking at Boris, put the plug in the tank, and turned his back on him and walked out. It must be hard to have a kingdom without subjects, reasoned Boris. Now, there was also young James' wife and Jameson, his son. Boris didn't have much of a sense of humor, though he could laugh, and he could laugh at a joke he didn't get, and think that laughing at a joke he didn't get was funny, and laugh some more. So when young James confided in him, which was almost more than Boris could stand, that, mostly at the insistence of his wife Marianne, they had named their son Jameson. Boris laughed. What's his name? Boris asked again. Jameson. We thought it was time for a change, said young James. Though she would help out some, she preferred her own job out of the house. Marianne seldom was down at the main barn, though they lived a mile away at a new house James had built when they were married. But she would come down to help if there was additional work to do during peak haying times or moving the animals around. Marianne had grown up on a farm. The farm was no longer in her family. Her way with animals was forthright and gentle. You want me to keep going? This is about halfway. Feel?
Not sure. Let's see where we are. Maybe it makes sense to do one more story, and I think that'd be great
All right.
because we.
Okay. To make
Thank you.
to read the end.
Oh, do you want to read like the last couple of pages?
Or
See how it
last-
turns out.
See where it lands. We'll just see. We don't know. We're gonna be surprised. Yeah, and then we can do the other because that would be, otherwise it'll get too long, I think.
The cows were turned out in the upper pastures now. Boris herded them up in the morning and brought them back down with young James. The pastures rose to the ridgeline above the barn and then extended to the northwest over the hill crest where the land flattened and spread out. There were apple trees scattered about, rock outcropping, heather, and some flowering shrubs. To Boris, it was the loveliest part of the entire homestead. And he tended to linger when he was up there looking down on the meadows that bordered the river and the mountains rising behind them on the eastern horizon. It's a sentimental landscape that Boris isn't content to leave be, so he remembers the Ice Age. So he stands on the outcropping and sees the jaggedness and ice, feels the harsh winds and cold. He feels comforted, knowing that this place wasn't always so habitable and stable, that it was under a goddamn block of ice once, and would be again. But this dwindling family, this diminished clan, that had probably cultivated the land as a small group for hundreds and hundreds of years, that is what had ended here. Late in the afternoon, young James drives his tractor into the yard and heads for the upper pasture, saying nothing to Boris. It's not time to bring in the cows. Old James comes out of the house to see why his son had returned from the fields. This afternoon, storms come in suddenly, and Boris sees the top of the thunderhead behind the ridgeline in the west. Young James would have seen the storm advancing from the lower fields. He's gone to bring in the cows early before the storm sets in, but the sky is already noticeably darker. Further to the south, the front has already moved across the sun. Kee more, young James yells, sounding like a banshee in a still close air. He is halfway to the ridgeline now, and most of the cows are over the rise and out of sight. Kee more, he yells again, and the first cows appear over the ridgeline. Though they usually answer young James' calls, they linger, and some have to be driven from behind, so young James disappears from view over the rise, just as the first sounds of thunder are heard at the barn. This isn't rolling thunder. It splits the air and leaves Boris breathless. Boris has opened the two large doors into the back barnyard. He stands just inside the barn watching the first drops of rain come down. The thunderhead is no longer visible. The dark, almost black underbelly of the storm is covering the sky. Boris instinctively ducks as a bolt of lightning sticks in the pasture above him. Still, the rain holds off. The first cows are in the walkway to the barn now. Another bolt of lightning on the ridge, and then somewhere in the pasture the rain starts falling, and old James is standing next to him, straining to see through the downpour and locate his son. There he is, Boris says. Young James coming over the rise, driving 3 cows before him with a tree branch. Go help him, commands old James, as they are both blinded by a lightning bolt. Boris steps out into the yard and sinks up to his calves in mud and manure. The rain is like a waterfall. He sees young James on the ground. Go help him, commands old James again. But Boris sees that young James is up on his feet, and as the lightning flashes nearby, Boris leaps back into the barn. I'm not going up there, he says. Young James is almost in the barnyard when he comes dripping wet into the barn covered with mud. With that suspicious half smile on his face, old James says, "Good work, son," before walking off. Young James turns to Boris. Get him in, he orders, and follows his father. The storm let up as suddenly as it appeared. So they would milk early, which was a good thing since Boris wouldn't be getting the Jeep to ride home in tonight. He walked the 10 miles to the interstate, not even trying to hitchhike. He stood at the entrance ramp with his thumb out. It was a fine evening. A cream-colored Mercedes came to a stop. Boris opened up the passenger door and looked at the driver, and then at the leather upholstery and the beige rugs, and then at his mud-caked boots, and got in. They didn't say anything. They rode in silence until Boris's place to get out. Boris said goodnight without looking at the seat or the rugs. 2 years later, Boris drove by the farm. He couldn't help himself, but he tried not to look. In case old or young James was standing out front, he wouldn't want to catch their eye. He hadn't seen any vehicles, so he turned around and drove by slower this time. The yard was full of weeds. There was no manure pile. There There were no tractors visible in the shed. It didn't linger. Alright, your turn, Mike.
Think about it.
Do you know where that is?
Oh, yeah. Mike, did you know that car? Did you know about that car at all in the story?
No, that car, I didn't know about that car,
Okay.
but maybe somebody had picked them up in a fancy car somewhere.
No, I meant the car earlier on in the beginning.
Oh, no, no.
Okay, so that
No,
was
that was
fiction,
more
or at
fictional,
least
yeah.
That was
involved
very
in
You know Boris?
There's a lot, Boris, I think, well, yeah, the beginning had a lot to do with, some of his father's family came from Budapest. So there was some reference to that, but it turned into fiction and references and fiction. So you have reality and fiction, you know. So this actually, the beginning of this is actually not fiction. It is, it's real. So the first paragraph took place on the subway platform, in New York. It's hard to stop kicking the machine when money is falling out. Pepe's face lights up when the change clatters on the subway floor. We stuff it in our pockets and ride to the next stop and do it again. The underground is like all this space that doesn't belong to anybody. Who cares if you're there? No one says, hey, get out of here. When we were kicking the ice cream machine, no money came out, but the machine started to go around by itself. We gave out free ice cream, and the people took it. The police chased us sometimes or take our names down. Whatever name you give them, the first time I gave them my real name, and they actually sent the letter home. Pepe's mother says the cops should mind their own business. And Tom says what his mother says, there is no justice in this world. Pepe screamed at me, you gave them your real name? And laughed. I hated Pepe then. I felt like I'd done everything wrong. For the same reason climbing got to be popular. Once you get about 10 feet off the ground on the outside of a building where no one can reach you, it feels like nobody owns it. I mean, who uses it? You look at the building, so what? I would be up on the outside of a building and the people would walk right by underneath me and not notice me at all. I'd have to yell to get them to look up. Walter's from Romania. Since he is always trying to impress people, he'd climb anything. We had a long fight once. We only went on so long because of the other kids who counted each time I knocked Walter down. I put my foot on his back and shoved him. When Walter got up, he'd leap like Tarzan. Then I'd knock him down again. The kids took this really seriously. They didn't get it. Collins counted 52. 52. How could Walter let that happen to him 52 times? Then Walter got angry and knocked me down once. And they acted like he won. I'll tell you something about fighting. When I'm in it, I'm glad when somebody breaks it up. I usually start angry, but that doesn't last long. What was good about Walter and me was that we could start a fight for real, but then go on and on without hurting each other. Until we were so tired, we just stopped. The other thing about Walter was that he didn't talk much. He mostly made noises. If there are designs on the outside of a building that I can hold on to, then I know I can climb that building. Walter climbed the big vent pipe to the top of the soda factory. Nobody else could do that. We tried, but there was nothing to hold on to. The other kids thought Walter was crazy. I did too, but they admired him. And that made Walter crazier, and he would do things that he could really get killed from. I couldn't really be friends with Walter because he didn't sit still. He's always climbing on something or swinging from bars or just leaps through the air. When he climbs, the street lights or the no parking signs by his house, his mother comes out yelling, "Walter, Walter!" But he doesn't stop. He just doesn't stop. He says he's Tarzan. So his mother has to yell until he comes down. Then she smacks him on the back of the head. That way she keeps Walter bent over in front of her all the way down the block to their house. But I could tell you, she liked him. Walter and me climbed together for a while. He was the first person I climbed buildings with. We'd pick out the tallest building on the block and then climb the smaller buildings around it to get to the top. That way, there was never a fall more than 2 stories high. We knew how high it would be, okay, to fall from it by jumping off things. First, you jump standing up and then go higher until you can only jump from a sitting down position. Then go higher until you can jump only by hanging from your hands. Though sometimes you'd start off hanging from your hands and end up being able to jump standing up. You could increase the height. You could jump from that way. You know, when you were as high as you could go from the way it feels when you hit the ground. Gail liked me even though I bothered her. I stuffed her mailbox with letters and sang songs under the window in the alleyway. I sang, "Gail, Gail, oh, beautiful Gail, do come down and marry me." We aren't as good as friends as we used to be. She lives on the 3rd floor of Jerry's house. He's one of my best friends, so I always have a good reason to be sitting in the hall waiting for her to come home. It was just fun to wait. I'd hear footsteps coming down the stairs and thinking, might be her. It almost always wasn't. But I'd wait until it started to get dark, and then I knew she was already home and wasn't coming out. Her mother was very skinny and had gray hair. She didn't have a father. Her brother was older than her, and she was older than me. I started a fight with him once. I wanted her to feel sorry for me since her brother could easily beat me up. And he did. But she wouldn't talk to me for 3 weeks after that. Not a word. She would walk right by me when I would wait for her to come out from school. I used to give her statues of the Blessed Virgin and rosaries I stole from the other kids because she was religious in a way, but she got to asking me questions about that, so I stopped those gifts. I found a box of kittens somebody had left on the street and in the park for her to come, and left on the street and waited in the park for her to come walking home from school. Carol tried to get her to keep going, but she stopped to talk to the cats. She liked them. Carol wouldn't even look at me. Gail didn't talk to me either, but I was holding the cats and she petted them, so it was almost like being talked to. I first became friends with Gail because she asked me to be in her club. I mean, we had a real place to meet, but there was nobody else in the club except us. So I brought Jerry. But she was so strict about being in the club that she didn't want me to bring anybody else. We met in the old trailer truck in the parking lot between the house and the Amco factory. She told us stories about what it meant to be a good person. Like she asked us, would you get your legs run over by a cement truck to save a child? She said a person who could do that was a kind of person she could really like. That was the only day Peppy was with us, and he thought she was crazy. He never came back, and Gail said he was the kind of person I should never be. I knew I wouldn't get my legs run over by a cement truck for anybody. But I lay awake at night, listening to the trucks outside, thinking about it. Gail didn't seem tough, but she was in the kind of way that if you said anything bad about God, she'd get angry, so she scared you. She didn't really make any rules, but feeling like I was always about to break one was hard sometimes. I didn't know how she could be friends with Carol, except that they were the only girls that lived in their building. Carol went under the bridge and pulled her pants down. I know that because Jane asked me in the movies if I wanted to go under the bridge with her and Carol. When I said no, she asked me why. I told her because it was a sin, but it was because her and Carol had got me in her house once and locked the door. They got out a butcher's knife and told me to take off my clothes. I ran down the hallway, but I couldn't get the lock open the door. Jane caught up to me with a knife, so I punched her in the mouth and got out. Jane and some other girls from my building who I'm not really friends with, and either is Gail, hang out in the alley sometimes. I can't get through the alley then because they'll grab me and tear my clothes trying to beat me up. But unless they have their older sisters there, I can get away. Jane said Carol has tits. I still told her it was a sin, so she told me she'd get me in the alley and kick my ass. There was a container factory. A container factory on the corner of Knott Street. There are no other buildings around. It's 5 stories high, and one day Walter and me climbed to the top. What happened was I got to the 3rd floor where there was a bigger ledge than on the other floors, and I started crying because I couldn't get any of the windows open and I was too scared to go up or down. Walter climbed back down and helped me get up to the top, practically pushing me. That was because he was afraid of getting caught. I didn't care. I wanted him to get help. Later in the lot, when he told some other kids, they didn't really believe us, and I didn't want to take them back to show them. But like with Peppy, it's hard to stop kicking the machine when the money's falling out. But the 6 guys that came back with us didn't really care if we climbed the building. They weren't impressed. They didn't want to climb it, and it was and it was night now. Hey, Walter, Carter said, you really climbed this? Yeah, man, Walter said proudly. You stupid Romanian asshole, Cole. So I didn't want them to make Walter do something stupid so he would fall off the building. So I said, hey, we can go up the fire escapes. There's a great view. What? Climb all the way the fuck up there? Carter complained. I climbed up the wall and leaped out to grab the bottom of the fire escape, and wasn't heavy enough to get it to come down all the way down. Walter had to pull my legs to get it to come down to the sidewalk. We made so much noise climbing up that Walter looked really worried. Walter did not like to get caught. If he got caught, he would get locked in the house for days. Standing in the street, you could see the courtyard in the middle of the building. About 4 stories down inside the courtyard was another building whose roof was all skylights. Maybe no one would have thought of it if the tiles on the top of the wall that went around the roof weren't loose. They were these heavy, dark brown tiles about 3 feet long. When I saw what was going to happen, I took off and was about halfway down the fire escape when I heard the first crash. Then there was screaming and laughing up on the roof, and then there was another crash. I hung from the 1st floor fire escape and let go, but because it was dark, I hit the ground sooner than I thought. But I ran as fast as I could, hunched over as low to the ground as I could, trying to be invisible. When I got around the corner, I didn't stick my head out to see what was happening. I kept going, walking a little, running a little, because my foot hurt. Some guys fight back when they get caught. Would yell, they didn't do it, take your hands off me. I knew then that they were going to blame me. Except maybe Walter, but he wouldn't say anything. I was trying to run, but my foot hurt. I thought they knew where I lived, the house number, the apartment number. They could just ask. They'd know my name. The brown brick house on the corner, 3rd floor. I had to go home. My foot was starting to swell up, and maybe they wouldn't come until the morning. When I got into my building, Jane was there, sitting on the bottom step of the 1st floor stairs, drinking a soda. I limped halfway across the hall and stopped. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to get by. I know where it hurts. She said, "You don't," I said. Jane said, "I know what you want. You only want one thing." I sort of knew what she was talking about, but I wasn't sure. Then Giuliano comes out, says to Jane, "What are you doing drinking soda in the hall? I'm supposed to clean up after you kids every day?" Jane jumped up and smashed her soda bottle on the wall and held the sharp end toward Giuliano and said and yelled, "Come on, you motherfucker! Come on! Where did you get that mouth from?" Giuliano said, "Where did you get that mouth from?" But he reached inside his door and got a broom to protect himself. Jane kept screaming, "Motherfucker!" But in a quiet kind of way, Giuliano knocked the bottle out of her hand. Then she put up her fists and came toward him, and I ran by and up the stairs. Giuliano used to be a sergeant in the army. He was always sucking on a cigar and muttering. Other people were opening their doors, and Jane's mother came down the stairs past me. I held on to the banister real tight. I thought she might knock me over. We called her the Black Witch because she was always dressed in black. She had a black hair like Jane and a real white face. She never looked at you or said anything, even when we followed her and yelled things at her. The next day I was afraid to leave school. I thought the police might be waiting for me at my house or outside school. School smelled like sour milk. My foot was swollen this morning, so I couldn't tie my shoelaces very tight. When they tried to make me do exercises, I told them I was going to throw up. Sometimes when my mother is quiet, I can ask her things, like last night was Sunday night, so she was quiet. What happens to people when they kill someone, I asked her. They go to jail for life, or sometimes they get executed. What happens if a kid kills someone, I asked. Well, sometimes the kid gets taken away to a camp in upper New York State. Why? Why? Did you kill someone? No, I heard some kids talking about a kid who killed someone by accident. He dropped a brick on their head or something like that. Okay. Oh, Jesus Christ, tomorrow's Monday. Go to bed. You have school, right? Have to get up, right? You're in my bed, I said. I slept on the couch. Oh, yeah? Right. Look, honey, go to sleep in my bed, all right? Can I just ask one more thing? One more thing. How many things are one more thing? She said, holding up a finger. One. Where's Grandma's rosary? I asked. I seen it once on a long time ago. It had a piece of the original cross from Calvary in it. The cross Jesus died on. I could use it. I could buy my freedom with it. It must be worth a lot, I thought. She didn't tell me. She just said, "That's the one now. Go to bed." I knew where it was anyway, and snuck it out of the box. That night, since I was sleeping in my mother's room, I stayed awake until I heard her snoring on the couch. No one was in front of my house, but I went to the park that Gail came through on her way home from school. When I told her what I had she got angry and said, "No one has that." I said, "Yes, they do." I said, "My grandfather got it from the Pope." He did. It's very old. I took the rosary out of my pocket. It looked old. The cross was made of dark, black, shiny wood. I showed her how the cross slid open, and then she saw it, a tiny splinter of wood on a white cloth under a piece of glass. Gail was very quiet. She looked, and here in the top of that cross, right here, is a piece of cloth with a saint's blood on it. I told her, "If this is real," Gail said, "it's one of the holiest things in the world." When I heard that word holy, I had some hope. Holy Spirit, Holy Mother of God. I thought about Jane. Once she said to me, "I can get better than you any day." I told her, "Oh yeah? Who?" "Just come over to Eddie's stoop and you'll see." Who was on Eddie's stoop? Carter, and I knew he wasn't better than me, just bigger. Until now, I had been extra careful. I wouldn't have even come into the park after school, except I didn't want to be close to my house, and there wasn't anywhere else I was sure to meet her. So I didn't see them come up behind me. Two guys in brown uniforms that said Amco container on them. That's the guy, right there," said Carter, pointing and smiling. "He's the only one who ran. We would have run if we had done it. We're not stupid." I jumped around and held out the cross. "This is a piece of the original cross," I said. "If you touch me, you'll go to hell." "That's blasphemy, that's blasphemy," Gal shouted. My mother said she didn't mind the broken windows. What she minded was me taking the rosary. That rosary doesn't have a piece of original cross in it. It's just a piece of wood. Carter said it looked like a splinter from his old man's ass. I hated it when Carter said that, so I don't know why I said it. She didn't say anything. "But it's old," I said, trying to make her feel better. Gail's mother wouldn't let her play with me. She wouldn't let me play with her. She told me to stop putting letters in her mailbox. I didn't see Walter around, so I figured he was locked in his house. I climbed alone for a while. I didn't tell anybody where I went. Break time.
Thank you so much.
He was, with me in show after show, either producing or working behind the scenes one way or the other. We worked on sets together, built flats together, just did stuff, painted, whatever needed to be done on whatever show was being done at Parish. I had liked hanging out with him so much, I asked him to be in a movie that I wanted to make. I didn't make the movie. And I asked him to be in it. And I asked him over lunch at Indian Food, because that's what he wanted to go eat at. And I said, I got a movie, I'd like you to be a character. And he said, "What sort of homeless guy do you want me to play?" Which was funny, because it was true that it was a homeless guy that I wanted to play. So I don't know how he sussed that out, just from that. But the funny part is, he was the first person I asked. He was the first one. He said yes right away, and then other people said no. And I just sort of went, eh. And then he got sick just right after that. And it wasn't very long. I went to the Cape while he was sick, and I thought, well, he couldn't go to the Cape this summer because he got sick, so I'll bring a tub full of sand and shells and stuff back. Susan and the kids got it at I think we got a National Seashore, which is admitting a crime, but we won't.
Oh, it's my idea for the crime.
Somewhere we got these seashells and sand, and we were gonna say it was from Wellfleet, but I don't think it was directly from Wellfleet. It might
It was
have been.
Marconi Beach.
Was it Marconi?
I think so.
All right. Well, it's not exactly the beach that Patrick liked on the Cape, but
We weren't that far down.
while we were getting it, it was about when he passed. Actually, we found out because we were there that week. This week. Okay, we love this week.
10
It's
years
the best
ago.
Cape week. And so came back to that, and that was 10 years ago. And we're here to do reading, and I have a good opening story called The Inheritance. And I'm Robert O'Leary, if you don't know who I am. And I'll start reading this story. The Inheritance by Patrick Freund. I got home that night, late, tired. Walked up the narrow stairs between dark blue walls lit by a flickering fluorescent light. An old Spider-Man poster looked down from the underside of the stairs above. I didn't like it. I saw Peter's face suspended over the handrail on the second floor. "Peter!" I hissed. "What's that smell?" He didn't answer. When I reached him, I saw why. I could make out the sneers on the faces of the two cops standing at the dark end of the hallway. Peter led me by the arm into his apartment. He closed the door, saying through his grimace, "Guy's been dead for 3 days. I'm the one who went in and found him." He wrinkled up his face like a prune and smiled. "You ought to go to the dentist," I sighed. I knew he wanted to talk. I didn't feel like listening. The walk from uptown can be difficult depending on the route. I'd started at 8 and it was after 11. Maybe I wanted to see those faces in Times Square. Maybe I didn't. But I never seemed prepared to look people's misery in the face from only an inch away. "Hey, I don't have $1. That's why I'm walking," I told one guy thankfully. Another guy just held out his hand. I gave him one of my 2 quarters. He threw it on the ground, screaming, "You call this money?" When I reached 37th Street, I felt like I'd grown eyes in the back of my head. "Cops are gonna want to talk to you," Peter said. "Why?" I asked. "Because they talk to everyone in the building." "Good. Let's go talk before they come knocking." So they knew who else lived in the building. That should have impressed them. After Wanda the Witch and Henry the Masseuse and Billy the Merchant Mariner and Pierre, who lived in the apartment below me, they were probably looking forward to meeting me. I tucked the bag of beer I was carrying under my arm and stepped out into the hall as a grim squad with the body bag arrived. The smell made my eyes water, but they looked happy. Maybe because they were exceptional. Saw things few other people saw. Did things few other people wanted to do. Their expression reminded me of the Hungarian butcher, a nickname for the autopsy guy at the hospital where I worked some nights as a fill-in night watchman when the regular was too drunk to make it. The Hungarian butcher was not neat. I liked the way his smile appeared to reflect a secret satisfaction at the way people tried to discreetly avoid him, at how the nurses could congregate at one side of the elevator when he was in it. Maybe he was smiling because he never had to say "excuse me" as he left the elevator. Sometimes I'd meet him on the back stairs on his way to the incinerator with a plain white plastic garbage bag filled with intestines, livers, a heart. His dirty hands and ugly stains on his clothes are what bothered me. Maybe what his smile really meant, like the body bag carrier's smiles, was, "You see me, You people, you are no more special than a cow. That's what looking at the Spider-Man poster on the underside of the stairs had me thinking like. Do you live here? Asked the guy with the swollen face who had followed the bag carriers up the stairs. Yeah. Where? He interrupted me before I could tell him. I live here, I pointed patiently. Yeah, you told me. I asked you where. There was no hostility in his voice. I told him. Where are you coming from? He went on. Shit. Where am I going? What? He threatened, but sounded only half awake. I told this detective my name, told him I lived here for about a year, and didn't know the guy. I'd actually never seen him. I added I was going to law school at night, which didn't matter because I got no response, and it was a lie anyway. Billy came out of Wanda's apartment next to the dead man's. Billy regularly put his fists through the jukebox at the bar downstairs, and the next day, paid for it. He walked toward us smiling, head tilted and hanging forward, and said in a low voice, "Old man dead, wasn't in his bed, lay on the floor, green as a door." The guy was all alone, protested Peter, but I knew he objected to the idea of himself dying alone. I felt the truth in this because I knew if I lived in this building very much longer, this would be my fate, to die in squalor and alone. Hey, 'twas his home, I said, horrified at the truth. It bothered me too, the dying alone part. So alone you could rot for 3 days and no one knew until they smelled you. I'd look forward to the seclusion of my apartment, but I didn't feel like being alone now. I wanted some information from Peter, who was good at conveying information, but not with Billy around. He was drunk and could go on about some nonsensical shit and then get angry if he thought you weren't listening to him. So I went to take a leak. The toilet was in the hall. I shared it with Billy. Wanda and Henry's apartments at the other end of the hall shared the luxury of having their toilets inside their apartments. The window of the toilet room in the hall was permanently stuck open about an inch on the bottom. The glass was opaque and in addition was painted a dark brown. I looked through the crack to see if the woman on the 3rd floor in the building on the next block was pissing for herself in front of her mirror, or posing for herself in front of her mirror. She usually posed naked in black underwear. She could stand in front of the mirror for a few minutes, then go over to her easel and paint, pose, paint, usually at night. And since she didn't have any curtains, I suppose she wanted someone to know she was an artist. Maybe she was just from the suburbs. She wasn't there tonight. I had a locked gate on the window by the fire escape, and seldom locked the door to my apartment. Sometimes when I got home, the door would have blown open. I had a half bathtub in the kitchen. Cute. It was always half full of dirty water because Pierre lived in the solid waste disposal zone of his own creation, and the water would take hours, sometimes days, to drain. Pierre wouldn't open his door, always busy. Come back later, he'd whine in his nasal voice through the closed door. When I came out of the toilet, the hall was empty, so I went down a flight to Peter's apartment. He lived in mine before I moved in. The paint was splattered on the ceiling and the walls because Peter used to lay in bed with a water pistol full of paint. The kind of paint that couldn't easily be painted over because I could see clearly the splash patterns over the new coat put on before he moved to the 2nd floor. Basically, though Peter's the most responsible person in the building, he's the superintendent now, which is why he lived on the 2nd floor apartment under mine and Billy's. It was really 2 apartments with the wall knocked out between them and a bathroom inside. So instead of 150 square feet, he had 300. Come in the kitchen, Peter said. His wife Jenny was sleeping in the bedroom. She was 7 months pregnant. Maybe that's why their apartment felt almost homey. It had a definite coziness about it. So we played poker here. Peter and me and Jenny and a friend or 2. Jenny would pass around a bottle of Jack Daniels. A heavy drinker herself, during the poker games she mostly passed the bottle. I was skeptical about not waking up Jenny. If I stretched out my arms, I could touch either side of the kitchen walls. We sat down. Our knees just touched under the kitchen table. A table I liked, a white enamel top with a double red band around the edge. The legs were painted red. I had to climb in the window. I broke it because I couldn't get it open. Danny was with me. We went up the fire escape. The police told us, you go. You're the superintendent, right? We don't want to break down the door. When I broke the window, it smelled so bad Danny vomited and had to leave. Peter's face looked contorted. Now that I think about it, I think it was some kind of joke, the police making me go in there. It was really one of the most horrible things I ever even seen. But I interrupted him, with the smell still lingering. I didn't want a visual image to go with it. Who was he? I mean, I'd lived here for about a year. I knew an old guy lived here, but I'd never seen him and didn't know his name. If Peter had been tricked into going into the apartment, I felt genuinely sorry for him. He was usually on the lucid side and wouldn't do something unpleasant, particularly as unpleasant as smelling the remains of death so close you could taste it, unless there was something in it for him. His name was Mees, said Peter. Ken Mees. I saw him a couple of times, very quiet. Sent his rent directly to Rose. On time, all the time. Would give a little nod when I passed him, but didn't look at me. He collected things from the street, but he was always dressed well. Always wore suits. I heard he had a lot of money. So Peter had a reason to climb in the window. Yeah, who told you that? I asked. Billy? Peter sounded offended. No, I had to call Rose. She said to me, look, Peter, you go in there. You look around, okay? It's my building, right? You look around. Anything you find, we'll split. Okay, Peter? Rose is a short woman. Her voice dominates her appearance, except the bright red lips from which it bursts. She would show up periodically, look at the building, and shake her head. This is quite a place, she would say. I'm gonna sell it. She never did. Rose thinks he has money, Peter went on. You know how people get weird when they're alone? Rose doesn't think he has any family. He was here when I moved in 4 years ago. There was one other old person here, a woman, but she died too. Rose thought he could very well have a big stash in the apartment. But when I got in, it smelled so bad I couldn't look, and the police were pounding on the door. Come on, open the door! I was sick when I got out of there, so the police stayed a long time. If there was anything in there, they probably got it. Maybe. I want to know why he died alone. Peter looked at me as though I were crazy to expect an answer. Jenny came out of the bedroom. She looked sleepy. Peter became solicitously protective. She should go back to bed. Jenny looked scornful. Meese probably had a stash of thousands, and now the cops have it. I'm telling you, Peter, if you had a stronger stomach, we'd probably be rich now. But added, Jesus, he probably didn't have $5 in his pocket. You picked through garbage. He picked through garbage. Rose thinks he had money. What does Rose know? Rose wishes he had money. And if you found $10, Rose would want half of it. There was a watch on the dresser when I went in the window. When the cops called me back, I noticed it wasn't there anymore. That's real absorbent of you, Peter, said Jenny. Mort, Rose's husband, came to clean out the apartment the next day. It was Sunday morning. Peter and me and Billy were standing or sitting on the stoop, not talking, just watching. The sun had just moved from behind the building on the corner, and I was enjoying its warmth. Look, Mort said, I could use some help cleaning out the apartment. This is what I'll pay you. Billy walked away. When Peter and I protested, Mort screamed, Shit! I can't get a couple of bums to do it for half that! I'm sorry, shit, I can get a couple of bums to do that for half that. Attention matters. Peter gave me a conspiratorial look. When Mort walked into the building, Peter whispered, Do it. I can't get back in there, really. I'll get sick. There might really be something left in there. That's why Mort's here. He'll keep the hawk's eye on you, though. But don't tell him if you find anything. He doesn't deserve it. He added, as if he had to convince me. Went up the second floor, where Mort was standing in Misa's doorway, shaking his head. He said quietly, If we find anything, we'll split it 50-50, okay? When I saw how the cops had trashed the apartment, or maybe that's how Mies lived, I knew why Mort had to add an incentive to get me to help him. Sure, I'll help you. Just pay me what you said. For the next couple of hours, we carried plastic garbage bags down to the street, or I carried them down. Mies had a couple of very fine suits, but we just chucked those in the bags. Looking at the stain on the floor where Mies had lain didn't make you want to save anything. Everything seemed to be touched by his dirty death. As the day wore on, Mort became subdued. I took that as a sign he didn't expect to find anything. It was when Mort was looking through the drawer of a dresser, the back of his bulky frame turned towards me, that I felt the lump in the inside pocket of one of Misa's suit jackets. I stuffed it in my pocket. Mort must have some kind of nose, because he turned around and asked suspiciously, Did you find anything? There's nothing here, I said, except dirt. I wondered if Mort could see my heart pounding in my chest. I worked faster. I wanted to see what was in the envelope. You want any of these pots? Asked Mort. Put them back where they came from, I answered, meaning the street. We were about done finally, at least Mort was. All the closets and dressers had been cleaned out, the clothes gone through. We hadn't looked through the window shutters or up the chimney or under floorboards. Mort seemed to have lost interest. We left Misa's remaining belongings scattered on the apartment floor. Mort locked the apartment and said he'd come back and finish it up. He gave me the pittance, that was my pay, without thanks, and plodded down the stairs. I walked slowly up to my apartment, feeling the envelope I'd stuffed in my jeans pocket. I wasn't in a hurry now. I wanted to prolong the suspense and savor the possibilities of what the envelope contained. I took the beer out of the fridge and threw the envelope on the bed, teasing myself with the idea of not looking inside it until tomorrow. I sat on the only chair in the apartment, staring at the envelope and sipping my beer. Whatever is in this feels just the size of currency, I thought. It could be $50 $100 bills. That would be okay. The thickness felt like it could be 50 bills. Halfway through my second beer, I thought about throwing it out the window unopened, or maybe just walking along the street and handing it to someone without a word. This envelope had greater possibilities unopened than opened. I put it in the refrigerator, took another beer, went down to Peter's apartment. Well, that sucked. It truly did, I said to Peter when he asked me how much Mort had paid me. Stupid cheap son of a bitch, Peter said in solidarity. Did you find anything? Mort might have. He was up there himself a lot while I carried the stuff downstairs, but if he did, He didn't tell me about it. He looked pretty discouraged. I didn't answer Peter's question of how many people I thought there are like me. Let's go into the apartment tonight, I suggested. Let's check out the walls and the floor, things like that. Yeah, have another beer, shouted Jenny sarcastically from the bedroom. Peter, don't you go climbing into that apartment tonight. Peter asked quietly, do you think we might find something? The chances of anyone living in a building like this having anything worth anything is remote, but not impossible. No, said Peter. It's stupid. I found something, I said. Was it worth keeping? Asked Jenny, joining us in the kitchen. I think it is, but I don't know because I haven't looked at it yet. You're drunk, Jenny decided. I found an envelope in one of Misa's jackets. It's full of something that feels like it might be money. But Jenny didn't say anything like bring it over here. Let's have a look. It's not money, she said, sounding certain. A business-sized white envelope about half an inch thick, I said, staring at her with quiet challenge. Kiss my ass, said Jenny. You come in here and drink my Jack Daniels and enjoy our hospitality. Where is that envelope? It's yours. Now show us what's in it. It's in the freezer. Well, frozen money is as good as thawed. Go get it. Get it, I mimicked, but started towards the door. The envelope was cold as I walked back into the apartment. I said, I'll open it. No, I don't think I will. I can't stand disappointments. All right, said Ginny. Go upstairs. Don't be disappointed. I'll open it. Peter grabbed the envelope and threw the contents on the kitchen table. Not really like him. It was money all right, but the denominations were all wrong. Those bills look weird, said Peter. Yeah, they're weird all right, said Jenny. They're $1 bills. I counted and recounted the crisp mint condition bills. Yep, I concluded $14. What a cheap old bastard, Jenny said smartly. I shrugged my shoulders and offered to split the money. No, you keep it. You deserve it, said Peter, for cleaning out the apartment. You really are noble, Peter. That's why I like you. Divide it up, Jenny ordered. She took her large jug full of pennies down from the shelf and poured me a bit of Jack Daniels. Then she gave us a few nickels and the rest pennies in exchange for one of our dollar bills, rolled up her sleeves, and dealt the cards. All right, Mike's turn.
All right. Very good. My glasses. So this is Irene, the dancer. Irene pressed Peter and Paulie's face against her thighs. A bare light hung from the ceiling on the landing. The dark silhouette of a man was projected onto the glass panel of the apartment door. Irene watched the doorknob turn slowly, very slowly. The shadow shifted silent from side to side. Though his mother's thigh felt soft and warm, Peter's face was pressed so tightly against it he couldn't breathe. When he tried to push his head back, Irene pressed back harder. Pressed back. Be quiet. Be quiet, she whispered. Paulie's ear was pressed against Irene's left thigh. He could see the doorknob straight in front of his eyes. He could see the man's effort to be silent as he watched the doorknob turn as slowly as the minute hand on a clock. Irene couldn't remember if she had locked the door. And in her near panic, pushed both boys' heads still harder into her thighs. They struggled to catch her breath and pushed her off her body. In the apartment across the landing, Queenie began barking. The silhouette at the door backed away. Irene listened to the steps receding on the stairs and relaxed her grip on her sons' heads. The two boys pushed off her thighs and took a deep, frantic breath. "Mom, you're smothering us," Peter said. "Thank you, Queenie," Irene whispered. "The doorknob was turning," said Paulie, more excited than scared. "I couldn't see the doorknob. My face was squashed." "Hush," Irene said. "It can still be out there." Irene put her against the door. Okay, nothing there, I guess," she said. Peter and Paul leaned against the wall while watching. "Now let's see if I forgot to lock it." When the door opened with a slight push, all the fear Irene held in check surfaced, and tears rolled down her face. She locked the door. She reassured Purdy and Paulie, who had retreated further down the hall. Paulie lay in one bed and Peter in the other, within arm's reach. Irene tucked him in, and knowing sleep was far off for her, Peter and Paulie agreed. So Irene went to her room at the opposite end of the railroad flat, but close to the front door. Peter fell asleep immediately. She didn't try and reassure them with platitudes. "You're safe," is all she said. The reflection of the car's headlights from the avenue below moved across the ceiling. He counted the spaces between them. That calmed him. The room felt desolate, but Peter might be grouchy if he woke him. He sang to himself in a tempo that considered with the headlights more was faster, less slower. He often sang himself to sleep this way. "Ring around the rosy, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." There were no lights on the ceiling above Irene. She lay on her bed, arms across her chest. The prospect of sleep lost sadness, replaced by anger. "It's better that he wasn't here," Irene growled. "Who knows who was on the other side of that door? And jerk that he is, he would have had to find, and maybe that would not have ended so well. But damn!" Paulie looked down at Peter's closed eyes. He really did seem to be asleep. "Hey, Peter," and then louder, "Peter! We didn't feed the owls." Peter sat up, wrinkled his brow. "We did feed them." "How do you know we didn't?" "I don't remember feeding them," said Paulie. "I don't remember either." They crept down the hall on hands and knees. The top shelf of the closet was barren. "It's empty," said Paulie. "See?" Irene made them promise to keep quiet about last night. They promised, but when Dad got home from work, she told them to go downstairs and play just to be safe. Stay right in front of the house. Peter and Paul jump up from the stoop when the giant Ulysses and Jesus appear from around the corner. A little sword fight, and Mr. Huckleberry. She didn't know that you have a family, 2 6-year-old boys. Oh, and let me see what else. Oh yeah, a wife? Your mother doesn't know you have been married for 6 years. Someone knows I'm here alone, I think. And Jesus from around the corner threatened to punch out Peter's eye with a nail if he didn't give him what he wanted. His baseball glove. My friend Margaret would babysit anymore because it doesn't matter what she does. The kids do whatever they want. We need to move. Where's Peter and Paul? What's that noise? Mr. Huckleberry is blocking the stairs up, and Peter and Paul went down. Huckleberry picked up the discard broom, handle and advanced toward Ulysses, who held his ground for a moment and then fled. "Don't worry," Peter whispered to Paulie. "He won't come down." Eyes adopted to the dark. Shapes became visible in the diffused light that leaked in from the unknown sources. Irene swept her arm through an arc to encompass the room. The bare beds and unshaded light bulb that hung from the ceiling, the worn shades transparent in the night lights of the city. "Mom, we're going to move in with you," Irene said. "No, you can't. I'm dying," Irene continued. "And your father is still angry at you. For everything." She leaned out the window. "I don't see Peter and Paul. Probably inside the doorway. They wouldn't go around the corner." Irene raised her voice. "Where are my cigarettes? So what are you going to do?" She exhaled, and the words with the smoke. "There is an aspect of innocence that just leads to catastrophe." Peter could just make out 2 wooden doors latched at the corner, a little bigger than he was. "Look," he said. "Paulie." "A way out." Paulie hesitated for only a moment. It must have been the 6-year-old that opened Pandora's box, because innocence just has a way of leading to catastrophe. "Yeah," Paulie said. "Where does it go?" They looked down the long, sloping tunnel. "It's dark. We'll go down a little and see," Peter said. Irene stopped herself from tossing the lit cigarette out of the window, thinking of Peter or Paul's heads 5 stories below. Irene crossed the small landing. She knocked on Dolly's door. "Queenie bark." "You're Queenie. How are you doing?" Dolly opened the door. "Did you hear Queenie barking in the middle of the night?" Irene asked Dolly. Dolly was likable, a champion donut eater, but this friendship was of a necessity. They sat side by side on their lounges, peering down. "I can see better now," said Peter. They inched slowly forward on their heels in unison, side by side, until they reached what had appeared from the beginning to be another set of doors. At the end of the ramp was in fact a wall on the other side of a drop off the opening into darkness. Peter and Paulie's arms wrapped around their knees, leaned forward together to look into the opening, because if their hunched over position in the small space was propelled forward and disappeared into the hole. They fell a few feet onto another ramp, steeper than the first, and slid until they were pressed against the boards across the ramp. Through the spaces, they could see dim lights, some red, some incandescent. "Where are we?" said Peter. The cold, damp air rushed through the cracks. "I don't want to stay here," said Paulie. "Don't you want to know what's on the other side of these boards?" Paulie started to crawl back up the tunnel. Wait, listen. They hear a faint rumble, getting louder, and a light filling the space outside the cracks. And then as the roar reached a crescendo, Peter screamed, "It's the subway!" Paulie was crawling as fast as he could back up the ramp. Irene walked down to 82nd Street and turned the corner. Ulysses and Jesus were telling another boy with a cast on his arm that if it itched so much, he should break it on the corner of the building. "I would," said Jesus. Irene asked Ulysses, "Have you seen Peter and Paul? Have you seen them?" "Who's that?" "Peter and Paul," she repeated, and held her hands on her hips to show how tall they are. "How much you give us?" "Proposition." "Ulysses, how much?" They accepted $1 each. "Yeah, we were playing with them in front of their house a little while ago, maybe. Mr. Huckleberry ate them." Well, Jesus. Mr. fucking Huckleberry, said Irene as she walked back the block trying to figure the size of the silhouette on the door. She stood in the entranceway at 5:05 and yelled, "Peter and Paulie," loud enough for Mr. Huckleberry to hear behind his locked door.
What do you want now?
Nikki, you had a question?
Raising my hand. I'm just wondering how much of these are his experiences growing up in New York, and how much are fiction? Does anybody have any?
Well, Mike knows the answer to that more than
Okay,
anybody.
the piece I just read, Irene the babysitter, Irene the dancer, she was our babysitter. Okay, so it's intermixed.
Well,
Now, there was an incident where somebody was trying to get into the apartment, but it wasn't the doorknob, it was the window. See, so there's a lot of this is coming from his background, and a lot is he's adding in a lot of fiction at the same time. So he's taking names of people who he actually knew and writing stories around that, and taking experiences that he knew and kind of writing the reality of it, and then at the same time writing fiction around it. So he's adding to the experience. So I had this experience, so I'm going to write this and then add this. So he from what I pick up on this, that's what he's. Ready? Here we go.
we're rolling.
The Token by Patrick Freund. But Jimmy wasn't thinking. You're not a killer or reciting to himself the euphemism. You could be a warrior, a citizen, a soldier, a patriot, a defender. That argument, he was leaving behind. Walking under the L, Jimmy was letting go of thinking. It was twilight and the trains overhead filled the evening air with the screech of metal on metal as they rounded the sharp turn and headed toward the tunnel under the East River. There was bustle all around as people headed home from their jobs, and Jimmy just walked right in the middle of it. The anonymity of it all encasing him in a protective cocoon. You have to be somebody walking in there, Jimmy told himself. Where I am to be, that's who they'll see, he muttered hopefully. As he pasted by the dinner, he looked to see who was eating and saw his image scattered by the passing cars' headlights in the diner's windows. And what Jimmy saw kicked a bit of confidence strong, handsome, even important looking. His back actually straightened up a bit. Jimmy didn't notice that the trousers that were too warm and big, hair a little greasy, pale complexion, tired out youth wears its own elegance. And that's what Jimmy sees. That's what Jimmy sees. Yeah. 2 elevators on his left and 2 on his right. As he entered the lobby through the double glass doors, a mirror straight ahead needed to be cleaned, and the brown and green walls discouraged animation. The old vinyl flooring had lost its sheen, and one of the overhead fluorescent lights was buzzing and flickering. Somewhat disconcerting to be standing in this oppressively dull space alone. Jimmy half-consciously felt like the center of the room and paused there to become acclimatized to this environment. Another kid came in, quickly followed by a second, and a woman who Jimmy assumed was his mother. No one acknowledged the other's presence. There was no solidarity here. The big, lumpy kid pushed the elevator button. The door opened immediately. They all shuffled in. They entered the waiting room, which was packed. The wooden benches along 3 of the walls were full. On the fourth side of the rectangle, 4 secretaries were separated from the waiting room by a half wall, the top of which was a counter. The woman at the nearest desk said, without looking up, "Check in." Jimmy sauntered up to the counter and rested his arm on it, as if he were about to order a scotch. "Name?" asked the woman. Jimmy felt almost embarrassed to say it out loud in a crowded room, though he recognized no one. "Do you have the letter with the appointment date?" she went on. Without looking at Jimmy, Jimmy held the letter out towards her. "Put it on the counter, please. Take a seat." He stepped back, and the woman who had accompanied her son stepped up and said with a strong PR accent, "If I got it." The woman ignored his gesture towards her son to approach and asked for his name. Though there were no seats, the woman said again, "Take a seat." This was a large, densely populated blue-collar neighborhood that had one of the highest quotas to fill in the country. Jimmy guessed, looking around the room, that he was the only CO there, and as far as he knew, the only in the entire district. After the last arrival was checked in, Jimmy watched as a second woman carried papers through a frosted glass door. Jimmy craned his neck but couldn't get a glimpse inside before the door closed. The woman came back and followed by another officer in uniform. "James Ledden," the officer announced. "What?" explained Jimmy to himself. I just got here." Not getting an immediate response, the officer repeated, "James Ledden." Jimmy approached the counter. The officer swung the half door open and commanded, "Follow me," and led Jimmy through the frosted glass door. There was a buzz of mumbling and squirming in response. Oh, Jimmy going to the head of the line. "I'm Captain William Moorhead," the officer said, holding out his hand to Jimmy. "This is a wholly civilian hearing. I am here to observe." He led Jimmy to a long metal and formica table around which sat 8 men, 4 on either side. One closest to the head of the table gestured for Jimmy to take a seat there. All things considered, thought Jimmy, I'm important. And his confidence surprisingly went up a few notches. As Jimmy sat down, the man continued in voice almost joyfully sounding, "What did we call you? James? Jimmy a nickname?" He then went on to explain as if he were selling a car why this would be a fair and impartial hearing, what Jimmy's rights were, and off they went around the table counterclockwise, each taking turns to ask Jimmy to explain and defend or to justify this group why he should believe what Jimmy said. Each approached differently. "You are a coward." Come back to this. So far, no surprises. The questions was wanted to familiarize himself with. All the players seem to be following the same script. All the players seem to be following the same script. That's it. The central Jimmy had to leave that. Wait a minute. Hold on. I got it? Yeah. Let me go back here. All the players seem to be following the same script. The central Jimmy had to have to leave that door open. That was the power of his objective to him. That the door to violence is always open. Sorry.
That's all right.
Let me go back there. Man, I couldn't get that over. I knew there was something wrong. Let me go back to the beginning
Sure.
paragraph.
Sure.
The questions were ones had familiarized themselves with. All the players seemed to be following the same script. The Central Committee for Conscientious Objectors had been accurate, proving Jimmy's skepticism misplaced, but still, what would you do if a man broke into your home and was going to rape and kill your mother? Asked the fifth man going around the table. Have a better chance of catching me if you asked. What would I do if I was going to rape and kill me? Jimmy had read they would ask him exactly this question, but had pushed it aside, thinking it was just rhetorical. But Jimmy sensed what's really the point of the question, and thought, if I say I'll him, then you're in the army now. It's like, but if I say, God has said, I don't know, but the result would be that my mother is raped and killed, then I'm a fucking coward and I wimp and disgusting. So Jimmy said, it's hypothetical. I've never had that happen, so I don't know what I would do. And he thought back to David down on Lafayette Street. Really, he just wanted me to stand up and tell these guys, I'm not going because it's wrong, and off to jail I go. The man said, feigning shocked surprise, you would let him rape your mother? Jimmy really wanted to get his mother out of the conversation, but couldn't get his teeth into his thoughts and blurted out, I never really thought about it. I would want to persuade him to change his mind. It's hypothetical. Jimmy had to leave that door open. That was the power of his objection. To him, that the door to violence is always open. Jimmy looks around the table. None of these guys look like they are out to get him. There is a weariness in their aspect. He wants them to know, believe, he, Jimmy, is one of them, who grew up like them, who believes like them. Jimmy wants them to see him as part of the tribe. Otherwise, Jimmy concludes, nothing will change. That's what taking it to the village square really means. We are done here, a voice interrupts his thoughts. You will receive a reply in a month or so. Jimmy got up and felt he should say thank you and shake their hands, but a strong suspicion that they were from a different tribe, and indeed, a month later in the mail, a formal rejection of his appeal in order to appear for induction on July 28th. Next appeal to the state board. Submit a thesis on God and man. And waited till 10 minutes before the deadline to have it postmarked at the Central Post Office on 34th Street. And then comes a notice of a second hearing, at which Jimmy is entitled to be accompanied by his lawyer, a clergy member. But Jimmy decided, out of necessity, doesn't have a lawyer, or even a lawyer or a clergy, that would be a priest. He will go it alone. And if his parents knew, he thinks this is the best strategy, but also believes that there is one who can accurately represent him. When he arrives at the draft board a second time, the waiting room is empty and he is greeted by Captain Weaver, an Army lawyer who advises Jimmy that he is here to make sure Jimmy's appeal is fairly and accurately handled. What this captain needs to believe is that Jimmy is sincere, that his position rests on faith. And it's faith, the presence or absence of faith. Jimmy has spent the last 2 months. What does it mean to have faith? To believe when God is just a configuration of fear and need and want, and that the center of it all is me? Decided Jimmy, it's me I believe in. All those years of religion, of holy holies, of Catholicism and penance and fear and hell, and here is Jimmy before he goes up in the elevator, walking back and forth, pounding his fist in his hand. Thinking out loud, it comes down to the same thing all the time. This is where I end up. You can't make me kill anyone. I won't kill anyone. And what's so fucking hard about all of this that really is not right or wrong, they contradict one another. They cancel each other out. What's left is me and you, Mr. Army, or whoever. If we kill each other, that's the end. End. That's what I'm afraid of. The end. Jimmy shakes his head. I just don't feel like killing anybody. Killing anybody. I don't want to go down that road. I'm afraid.
Go for it.
Affordable Housing, written by Patrick Freund. In the middle of the night, Louis' cell rings. What the fuck is it this time? Yeah, Louis says into the phone. Yeah, 24 Arbor Street. You know where that is. He listens. I'm here, so I'll be here. Right. Disconnects it. The bouncer at the club was kind enough to give him a call and to find a cabbie, willing to allow his drunken daughter into his cab. At least she was able to remember my phone number, thought Louis hopefully. When he looked out the window a few minutes later, the cabbie was leaning, arms folded against the door of the cab. He scanned the facade of the building, looking for signs of life. At least I don't have to drive over to the hospital like in Newark, Louis said to himself in the elevator. That's misery. Man, I can tell. But it's good. Tessie can call me, you know. I can wake up in the middle of the night. No big deal. I can do that for her. Louis walked over for the cabbie and pointed to his limp daughter lying across the back seat. Standing proudly and stamping his foot, the cabbie enunciated with exaggerated dignity, I am Castilian. Do you know what that means? Louis showed him his empty palms. It means the cabbie declared that I am a man of honor. He stood at attention and opened the door. But before Louis could slide Tess out of the cab, he said, now, you must give me $150. Of course, that's what I have in my pocket, said Louis. Your daughter, if I am not mistaken, lies unconscious in the cab. So of course, that is what you have in your pocket, or within reach, said the cabbie. Louis counts what he takes out of his pocket, $140. Fortunately, how far did you drive? 25 blocks. A good compromise, concluded the cabbie taking the money. The cabbie was right. The risk warranted the higher fare. Tess could have vomited in his cab. Louis slid his arms under Tess's armpits and joined his hands across her breast. Her head rested against his stomach as he dragged her out of the cab. Her heels dragged across the sidewalk. Louis pulled her up to her feet at the building, up at the feet to the building's door, which the cabbie held open for him. Louis thanked him and heaved Tess over his shoulder. Seemed easiest way to get negotiated stairs to the foyer. Inside the elevator, Louis propped Tessie up against the wall and held the three pressing his thighs against her stomach. He pushed a button for 4. Louis doesn't live in this building. He stays here at apartment 4A as a guest of sorts. Louis doesn't live anywhere since he had to leave the apartment in Park Slope. Snatch out from under him a family conspiracy. It seemed for 5 years. Louis had shared the apartment with a Chinese guy who had spoken enough English for them to agree. Chinese guy in the front, Louis in the back. They paid cheap rent but no lease. So when the owner of the brownstone's nephew wanted to move into their apartment, they'd had to leave on short notice. Louis put everything in storage. "You're lucky I just happened to be here," Louis said to his unconscious daughter. "So you didn't have that far to go. I doubt that taxi would have taken you out to Brooklyn or Queens. So it is good. I think Maria had 2 bottles of wine, so she's out for the night, I hope." Louis shook his head and muttered, "I better not have to take you to the hospital." He opened the door to 4B, this time using the forearm to keep Tess from sliding down the wall. He threw her arm over his neck and kicked the door closed. Tess stirred as he put her down on the couch. "Oh, this place is disgusting," Tess moaned. Looking up from under her eyebrows, she saw Louis's face. "Dad, that's you! Where did you bring me?" Tess screamed. "It stinks in here." Louis slushed her. "Go back to sleep," he ordered quietly. If Tess got going, she'd wake Maria. Wake Maria? Who would then get going? And Louis wouldn't get any sleep. And he couldn't afford to miss work. "It's all right," said Louis, trying but failing to sound reassuring. "It's 3 o'clock. Go back to sleep." Tessa's head flopped back and her mouth hung open. Louise eased her down and lifted her legs onto the couch. After wiping Tessa's face with a washcloth, Louis tossed the cushions from the chairs onto the floor. One under his hip, one under his shoulder, and one for his head. He lay down and instantly fell asleep. The next day, after work, on his way down to Maria's, Louis decided that maybe Tess had enough class stealing cold vodka, and she done sharing an apartment with Claire, the club alcoholics on 10th Avenue. When Louis had mentioned this the other day, Tess looked him up and down. Dad, she said, "you're sharing an apartment with an old lady. Maybe I'm the one that should be helping you move out." "Guess what, Dad?" Louis waited but had to answer what if he wanted to know what it was. "She's 85 years old," Tess yelled. It's okay to help out or whatever you're doing, but you've been camped out. I mean, Do you live there for 3 months? You make me laugh, Tessie, Louis had said. The rent here is $500. If it was on the market, it would be $5,000. Do I make my point? And right now it's free, Tess had added unhappily. Louis exhaled with unpleasant anticipation as he entered the elevator. He expected that Maria would have finished a bottle of wine, and he would have had to be a referee if Tess was still there. But the apartment was empty. He opened the windows. Maria's sensitivity to temperature sometimes kept the apartment feeling like an oven. Louis let gravity pull him down into the couch. He rested his head on the back and closed his eyes. When Louis opened them, he looked around the room and noticed that Maria had taken her portable oxygen tank. She could carry it inconspicuously in its briefcase. Maria didn't have the energy to walk far, so Louis walked around the corner to Sal's. Sal had been here for about 50 years. Louis took 2 steps down and stood before the etched glass door with 2 large glass windows on either side. He could see Maria and Tess sitting at a small round table towards the back. They were the only people in the restaurant except for Sal, doing paperwork in the corner and a waiter behind the bar. Sal's is a small space, dimly lit with reddish ambience, a couple of cushy booths opposite the bar, and some round tables between them. A cozy and unpretentious space that suited Louis. Louis watched as his daughter and Maria appeared to be engaged in amicable conversation. In the dim light, they seemed unsubstantial to Louis. He imagined that should they suddenly disappear, their space at the table would instantaneously filled up, so would Sal's for that matter. The longevity is in the buildings, thought Louis, in the structure. I'm the straggler, he thought. The tribes here are good for 2 generations, and bam, you hardly notice them. There's a new tribe. That's how Louis thought. That's how Louis thought about it. How you do? Louis waved to Sal as he pushed open the door. Good evening, nodded Sal. Good to see you again. Louis joined Maria and Tess. Let's go sit on the cushy seat in the back, Louis suggested. Be more comfortable for you, Maria. Maria gave Louis that one hell of a good idea look and said, these chairs don't get any softer in the dim light of Sal's. Louis could see the village of Maria's striking handsomeness. She should have tried film thought. Should have tried film thought. But she was fixated on the theater. I'll buy us dinner, volunteered Louis. Sal won't mind as much that we are occupying his prime dinner setting. Hey, Dad, I know you're not looking at me, Tess pushed. Do you? And why? What's his name care where we sit? And why would you care where we sit? That's nobody else is here. There's nobody else here. Oh, it's all crowded. It's not even 6 o'clock yet, Louis said, and then looked at Tess. How you doing, Tessie? Well, how do you do, Dad? I'm glad to meet you too. Excuse me, Maria said, raising her hand. I'm not family. I've been married 3 times, but could you tone down the intimacies because at this rate I am going to become deaf. Maria continued as she placed her hand on Louis's arm. Tess and I have been discussing the theater, and I think she could make it work. You see, Dad, I'm the butterfly in the cocoon. You know what that means, right, Dad? Yeah, I believe that. I see it, but I think what's right today is a different cocoon, and I've got a name. You've got a name. You mean your mother gave you a name, said Tess Laura on East 71st Street. Rent control. Not going over to charge you. 2 bedrooms. Don't say I don't do anything for you. Rent control, scoffed Tess. How old is she, 80? She's like a little younger than me. A little younger than me? What kind of English is that? What does that tell me, a little younger than me? Does that tell me what I need to know? Is her hair falling out? Is her stomach? Tess stopped talking as a way to clear his throat. Good evening, Armand, greeted Maria. Good evening, nodded Armand. Drinks? I've got it, Maria. Louis held up his hand. 1 Coke and a bottle of Merlot. Whatever you recommend will do, Armand. Thanks. Tessie shakes her head. I don't remember as far back as 2 months old, but did I ever drink Coke? Your sense of humor, Dad, is so peculiar. So peculiar. Sometimes I mean you are trying to be funny, right? Tess looks around, looks under the table. She pats the seat. But this place is comfy. If a little dusty, cobwebby, if you know what I mean. Tess looks at Maria, who looks puzzled. I can imagine Tess continue. Cobwebs here, filling the corners, hanging from the ceiling. If you want to live in this part of the world, in this part of town, then you either got to make the bucks or find the cobwebs. Right, Louis? Pronounced Maria. Armand takes their order for dinner. You've known Sal for a while, haven't you? Asked Louis. Maria holds out her glass for Louis to refill it. Tess imitates Maria, and Louis half fills her glass. I met Sal in Paris. We were all 5 or 6 years after the war. Maria addresses Tess. The Second World War? I know there's been a few since then. We went. Sal was already there. He came over to Paris from Italy. He'd managed to stay in Italy after the war. He had some family there. Well, a group of girls, young women, sailed over from France. We were unscathed by the war. I was married and divorced there. And the place we often went on the Rue d'Or, well, Sal opened this place very similar to it in a similar neighborhood. I've been here since then, more or less. I don't see any cobwebs. After dinner, outside on the pavement next to Sal's, Maria's looking for her cigarettes. Louis turns to Tessie. She left her oxygen inside. Could you get it? In the black case. You were right, Dad. It is starting to fill up with people closer to my age. Maria has found her cigarettes, and she holds the pack out to Louis. Sure, you don't want one? It's been at least 25 years, Maria. Maria gets her cigarettes lit. Did I know you when you smoked? Asked Maria. Tess hands Maria's the oxygen kit. They both watch as Maria tries to open it with one hand and hold the lit cigarette in the other. Here, says Louis, and takes Maria's arm in one hand and oxygen in the other, and leads her over to the stoop where Maria sits down. Maria managed to inhale half a puff without croaking on the pavement. She actually looks kind of peaceful. The mini oxygen tank has a little face mask on it, so Maria can follow the smoke with a few zappa of oxygen, and then that seems to perk her up. Yeah, I think. We didn't run across each other when I smoked. I remember going to the cookie bar on Hudson Street. The place was always full of smoke. You were hanging out with the professionals then, I think. Tess said, you mean real professionals? But no one took the bait. And circling the square, Maria said. It was a few blocks from here, Louis said. I did Shakespeare and Greek there, Tess, feigning shock. What? You did Shakespeare? No. You. And Louis recited. If we shadows have offended, think but this and all is mended, that you have but stammered here while these visions did appear. Dad, you played puck. I can't be. I think I've told you that. Like 100 times, answers Tess. So I don't have to make a point then, concludes Louis. Who you yell, grab Maria. Who you yell, grab Maria. She's sliding over. Oh shit, adds Tess and sits down at the stoop as so Maria can lean on her. Louis sits down on the other side of Maria. She takes a couple of drags on her oxygen and stamps out her cigarette. Tess leans out so she can look across Maria at Louis. Dad, I'm whining now. You did repertory? You did Antigone or something? Why can't you get me a part? You know, Tess, and you do know, I will accept for the off parts, and I like doing them. I haven't had a decent part in 10 years. Maria takes a swig of oxygen and perks up. You have a great part here, and I'm talking to both of you, Maria says. If a part doesn't come along, write your own part. I've been doing it for 20 years. And look at me, I'm still here. The moment of silence to absorb this was broken by Tess. Hey, Dad, you still here? Play your part. I was reading Shakespeare to you when you were 5 years old. What else is there to do? The rest is up to you, added Maria. Are you good, Maria? Asks Louis. Or do you need to go upstairs? I'm actually rather comfortable and I would love another glass of wine. Maybe Sal would let you bring your glass outside. The next day at Sal's, it was just Louis and Maria. Louis was relieved that Tess had gone with Laura to see Laura's apartment. Sal served them both a double espresso. My dilemma, Maria, said Louis, is if you don't stay here, I believe I'll just fade away. I don't have the presence that you have. So you want to get married? To me? You know, I've been married 3 times. But you don't know why I married. I married for love. Yes, it's true. And I divorced because I was no longer in love. We had nothing. We had no other reason to marry. We had no money, no children. But you, who are handsome enough, would marry me for affordable housing. So you could stay in my apartment after I die. which is likely to be sooner than I'd like. Oh, I'll game the system, Maria went on. If I believe it is corrupt and unfair and housing in this city, you have a right to a roof over your head. But marriage? Are you willing to kiss me? Do you find me intoxicatingly beautiful? Will you hold me close to you and tell me you love me? Maria was silent for a while. No, she said sadly. You couldn't play the part. And of course, I don't love you. So you can sleep on my couch if you remain polite and continue to help me, which you do admirably. You will not fade away, at least for another 30 years.